So we're in a new sermon series called Encountering Hope. And last week we looked at hope through temptation. And we looked at Jesus being tempted in the desert. And as we spent time looking at that, we learned that Jesus didn't banish Satan by any supernatural force, but that Jesus used what you and I have in the Scriptures. And on Sunday, what I did with the children of the church, that's why there's this peanut M&M's bag, Shay gave each of them 2 Starbursts that they had to hold on to, and I told them, you cannot eat the Starburst. No matter what I say, no matter what I do, you cannot eat the Starburst. And then Shay and I proceeded to eat a good number of the peanut M&Ms. Might be my favorite sermon I've ever done. I'm standing in the sanctuary and I'm just chomping down on peanut M&Ms. It was wonderful. Kids didn't think so, but it was wonderful, let me tell you. I did tell them that as long as they asked their parents, they can have the Starburst. So they got to have Starburst in church, which was a lot of fun. But the reason why I did that is because I wanted them to understand that if they were to have gone through and eaten the Starburst, that there would be consequences. There would be that pang of guilt. And this is something that you and I, as adults, we understand these things. But a child, maybe not, but they will when they get older. And I talked that we go through temptation, but the beautiful thing is like I said, that Jesus used the Scriptures to get through temptation. That's why it's important that we come to church. It's why it's important that we read our Bibles, so that we know these things and can lead on these things. Tonight, I want to talk to you about hope in darkness. Back in September, if you'll remember, it was actually September 11th, and I only remember that because of the actual date. But we had Kickoff Sunday here, and I had everybody dress up in their jerseys, and much to my dismay, it was mostly Giants blue. There was 1 or 2 Jets jerseys, and, I feel sorry for them. But we came dressed in our jerseys, and I talked about the idea that Nicodemus was just a fan. And we kicked off a sermon series called Are You a Fan? They're not a fan. And I talked about the difference between a fan and a follower, that Nicodemus was in fact a fan and not a follower. Because Nicodemus was this high-ranking person in Jewish society, very educated. But because of his reputation, he did not want to be seen during the daytime going to that Jesus guy. And so he made the decision that he would go at night and he would ask his questions at night to Jesus. Now, tomorrow, if you aren't going to be in church, I have these ping pong balls. They're actually practice golf balls. And I'm going to be doing something with the youth that I'm going to half demonstrate for you tonight. Because it's kind of the perfect analogy of Nicodemus. So when you get a ball to move, you can roll it on the ground like that, correct? You can just roll it on the ground. Well, tomorrow I'm going to have a hairdryer. Yeah, I was waiting for the laughter. And I'm going to be blowing the ball up in the air, which is another way for the ball to be able to move, right? They're both moving. One is horizontal and one is vertical. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it's the perfect explanation of Nicodemus. See, Nicodemus was so wrapped up in his own little world, the vertical world, about his relationship with other people, that he neglected that's horizontal. He neglected the vertical because he was so focused on the horizontal. There's 2 ways for that ball to be able to move. One is to be rolling horizontally, and one is to be going vertically. But if you were closed-minded, you don't understand. You're just so focused in that you're not concentrating on your vertical relationship. It's important that you have both. You have your horizontal relationship with others, and you have your vertical relationship. That's why the cross is a perfect example, right? But do you notice which one makes up the most? It's the vertical one, right? That's what goes into the ground. That's what holds up the horizontal. So if we have our vertical relationship, then we have our horizontal relationship. So I'm not going to go back and recap all of what I talked about back in September, which this is the complication if you wind up doing passages that you've already done, is you got to create a new twist on it. So instead I want to focus on John 3, starting in verse 9. Because Nicodemus just didn't get it. Jesus kept trying to explain to him, and in verse 9, Nicodemus said to him, "How can these things be?" Nicodemus just doesn't get it. He's missing the boat. As Jesus is trying to explain these things, and Jesus continues to try to explain these things to Nicodemus, and he just isn't understanding. And he winds up leaving. We don't really know kind of what happens, but he winds up leaving. And Jesus kept trying to explain and explain and explain the greatest love story ever told. That's what John 3:16 and 17 are. They're the greatest love story that's ever been told. And John 3:16 is one of the most famous scriptures in the whole Bible, right? You see it at sporting events. You learn it at Vacation Bible School. You learn it in Sunday school. It's one of the first verses that parents try to teach their children, right? They don't teach them the shortest verse, Jesus wept, right? Nobody wants their child going around the house, "I learned a scripture, Jesus wept." All right, great. No, they teach them John 3:16. But my favorite New Testament verse is actually the one that follows, John 3:17. "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him." In fact, I love that verse so much, I actually have it tattooed on my arm because people know John 3:16, but when they see John 3:17, it opens a window. It opens a door, because even if they don't go to church, guess what? They know John 3:16, or at least have a general idea of it. They're curious about John 3:17. And it says the same thing, just shorter. I want to share a story with you called The Geese in the Snowstorm. There was a man, and he was married. And him and his wife, they had some children. And the man and his family, they lived in a small farming town. And as they lived in the small farming town, he was a devout atheist. His wife was this devout Christian. And she told him, "That's fine if you don't want to go to church, but I'm going to bring the kids with me and we're going to go to church." So every Sunday, she got the kids ready, took them to church, brought them back, and the dad would just sit at home. Well, one time there was this snowstorm that rolled in. This didn't stop the wife from going. She was going to bring her kids to church. And so she packed them up, got ready, and left. And as soon as they left, the storm seemed to get worse. Well, the man had had this conversation with his wife earlier, and he had started to get into the phase of mocking more and more. And he used to say, "How can you believe this? How can you believe that God would leave heaven and come down to earth? It makes no sense. It's completely unbelievable. You're wasting your Sunday mornings." And as his family left and he's sitting in front of the fireplace, he's reflecting on that, and he's proud of himself. Well, all of a sudden, as he's sitting there, he hears a thud. He thinks, oh, maybe just the heat is coming on, or maybe it was just something in the fire. You know, it is what it is. And he goes back into celebrating this victory that he's had. And then all of a sudden, thud. Well, this time, he's going to get up and he's going to see what happened. So he runs over to the door and realizes that two geese have flown into his door. And he looks out, and there's all of these geese up in the sky, and all they can do, because the storm is so bad, is just go around in circles. And all of a sudden, he has all of this compassion for these birds. He says, I have to find a way to be able to help them. They're just trying to go south for the winter. They're just trying to go to safety. They're just trying to find their place. Oh, I know. I'll open up the barn. So he puts on his jacket, runs out to the barn, and opens up the barn doors to be able to provide this warmth and this place of safety for the birds. Well, the birds don't follow. He's like, well, maybe they just need some direction. So he decides that he's going to try to show them the way into the barn. Nothing. So then he decides, I know, bread. I'll go and I'll get some bread. I'll make a trail. Surely then they will pick up that I have this barn that is warm, that is ready for them. So he goes inside, gets the bread, lays it out. But the problem is it's so windy and it's snowing so hard, they can't see it. Well, now this man is so frustrated. So he goes back outside and he's doing everything he can. He's trying to chase them into the barn. But all he's doing at this point is he's just making them scatter all over the place. And he's so angry and he's so frustrated, and he just says, why won't they let me help them? Why don't they understand what I'm trying to do? Can't they see that I'm trying to protect them? Can't they see I'm trying to take care of them? And with that, he drops down to his knees in tears because he realized he had lost the argument earlier with his wife. See, the only way that the geese would listen to this man is if he, in fact, became one of them. That is why God sent Jesus. That is why God came down from heaven to walk on earth, so we would have an example to be able to follow. So when God says, I so love the world, that God in fact does mean that he so in fact loves the world. It wasn't just words. He's trying to have this protection, trying to be there for us, trying to care for us. I don't know if I've shared this before or not, but I'm actually quite a big fan of chick flicks. In college, I was never allowed to pick the movie because the guys I lived with knew the route that we would be going. So as I was practicing this, I started thinking about my all-time favorite movies, and I do believe that The Notebook is, in fact, my favorite movie of all time. And, wow. Yeah, you didn't see this coming. I know. If you go through our movie collection at the Parsonage, all the chick flicks, they're mine. So I'm going to do a little spoiler because I got to tell you about the movie, The Notebook. You read it. It's also a book, yes. So there's a man in this movie, and his name is Noah. And Noah goes to a center daily and reads to his wife who has Alzheimer's. And as he just reads from this book over and over and over and over again. And he does this every single day. He travels over, pulls out the book, and reads to her. And he does this over and over and over again because he's waiting for just the 10 minutes at the end where she'll remember. Just, Dot's going to cry. He's waiting for just the 10 minutes that they'll have together where she remembers who he is. I would be a horrible screenwriter for Hollywood. Do you know why The Notebook is my favorite movie? Because that's what love really is. Right? So often we have these pictures of love that we're skipping through fields and it's all wonderful. But the reality is that love is hard, isn't it? There are a lot of really good moments with love, right? There's also a lot of challenges with love. And that's why I love that movie. I also love the Hallmark Christmas movies. I have it down to a science. You wait till the last 10 minutes, bet you they're going to get back together. Right? I have it down to a science. I've seen all of them. I love them. They start in November, and I'm like the happiest person in the world. And my wife is like, Josh, you're ridiculous. You're watching another one of those. I love a love story. What can I say? But I want to close with one last short story called John 3:16. There was a boy, and he was homeless. And so what he would do is he would sell newspapers just to be able to have money for food. And it's a cold day, much like today. And so he goes up to the police officer and he says, "Sir, is there any place where I can stay where a poor boy like me could just spend the night?" The officer looks and says, "Sure. You see that white building down the street? Just knock on the door, and when they come to the door, just say John 3:16. The boy's like, "All right, well, this is a little weird, but we'll roll with it." So he goes down, knocks on the door, and the woman comes to the door and says, "How can I help you?" And he looks at her and says, "John 3:16? She says, "Sure, come on in." She leads him to this big room with this gorgeous fireplace and sits him down in front of it. And she walks out of the room, and the boy sits there and thinks to himself and says, I don't know John 3:16, but it sure makes a cold boy feel warm. This woman then walks back in and says, "Are you hungry?" And the boy looks at her and says, "Well, I haven't really had a whole lot to eat over the last couple of days, so yeah, I would love to be able to eat something." Well, she leads him into the next room, and there's this table there with more food than you could ever imagine. And he's eating, and he's eating, and he's eating, till he can't eat anymore. And he thinks to himself again, I don't understand John 3:16, but it sure makes a hungry boy feel full. Well, then she asks him if he wants a bath, and he says, "Well, I can't remember the last time I got a bath. I think it was when they opened the fire hydrant in the summer. Yeah, that would be great." So as he's sitting in this bathtub, he thinks to himself, I still don't understand or know John 3:16, but it sure makes a dirty boy clean. Well, then he goes into the bedroom, and there's the biggest bed he's ever seen in his life. After all, he's used to sleeping in a little cardboard box in an alleyway. And he jumps into the bed, and as he's laying in bed and he's falling asleep, he sits and thinks to himself, I still don't understand John 3:16, but it sure makes a tired boy feel rested. Well, he gets up the next morning, runs downstairs, and again just fills his face with as much food as he possibly can. And he then sits down with the woman who pulls out the Bible and reads John 3:16 to him. And she talks to him for a little while about how Jesus came and Jesus died for everyone. She looks and she says, Do you understand John 3:16? The boy says, "No. But it does help me go from being hopeless to having hope." It's not the ending that you probably thought. You probably thought you knew where the story was going, but that's where the story ends. And I think a lot of times, Nicodemus is that little boy. Jesus kept understanding and trying to teach Nicodemus what John 3:16 is, what John 3:17 is. But Nicodemus just never got it. But the reality is that you and I sometimes find ourselves as Nicodemus. We don't wake up every morning reflecting on John 3:16, right? We don't get out of the bed and we're like, "Oh my gosh, I am so loved. This is wonderful." Right? What you do is you get out of bed and you're like, got to get the kids ready. Then I got to go to work. I got to deal with that person. And then I got to have this meeting. And then I have to cook dinner. And then I have to get the kids to do their homework. And then I put them to bed and enter my solid time of prayer, where I pray they just go to bed. They don't need 5 glasses of water. So that way there can be some mommy or dad time. And if you're not a Philadelphia fan, maybe you'll watch your team win. You never know. But the reality is that it's very easy for us to go a whole day without thinking about the most famous verse in the whole Bible. The verse that has so much hope, that has so much love, in a world that so desperately needs John 3:16 as more than just a sign and a sporting event. But the only way that they're going to have hope in their darkness is if we bring it. See, the irony in the whole Nicodemus situation is that as Nicodemus is sitting there in the dark with Jesus, Jesus is the light of the world sitting right across from Nicodemus. But he's so wrapped up in the horizontal that he can't see the light sitting across from him that's in the vertical. Sometimes I think we do the same thing. Let's be the people this week that focus on the vertical. Let's be the people that share that hope, that love that other people need to hear. Maybe even invite them to church. Amen.